So one of my most frequently asked questions whenever I talk to you lovely folks out there is what YouTube sites do I not like? Like what YouTubers don't I like? What are like my least favorite ones? And in the moment, I have a tough time coming up with any, like aside from the obvious ones, like the douche tubers off the top of my head. And there is one though that is pretty big and mainstream within the game industry that I simply do not I cannot stand at all. And that would be Kind of Funny Games. Now, specifically Kind of Funny Games post Colin Moriarty, because I'm not going to go through the whole history of what happened with Colin Moriarty, but in my opinion, I think Moriarty just unfairly lambasted, and the people at Kind of Funny just stabbed him in the back, and Moriarty basically just left, went on to do his own thing, like Colin's Last Stand, where he made the Sacred Symbols podcast now, which I used to listen to pretty regularly, like about a year ago, but I kind of stopped listening to it. Maybe it's high time I went back and listened to it. But the reason I'm making this video today is to showcase, I guess, part of a reason why I find, the main reason why I find Kind of Funny so insufferable, and that would be Greg Miller. Now, Greg Miller, I have to preface this every time I talk about a YouTuber. I'm sure he's a nice guy in person. I've seen the guy in person. He seems like if I were to walk up to him and say like, "Hey man, how are you doing?" He wouldn't like fart in my face and tell me to go fuck myself. He'd actually be like a nice guy. He'd be cool as fuck, probably. But as a media personality, I find him insufferable. To me, he basically is the antithesis of the kind of skepticism and healthy journalism, I like journalism in quotes, that I like to see in the game industry. Whereas Colin Moriarty, I think, is much more appealing to me because he has a much more cynical eye towards this industry, like yours truly. Greg Miller, to me, it just feels like he is just sucking every dick that is put in front of him in order to promote Kind of Funny. And I don't like using words like sellout and shill and all that because they can be thrown around so easily. But I really do think Greg Miller is a sellout shill. This is a guy that left IGN, like one of the biggest like cocksuckers in the game industry, one of like the biggest, most powerful influencers, poisonous influencers in the game industry media, and one of the big guys. He used to be one of the big guys over there, and then he left, and then he started Kind of Funny with Colin Moriarty before they split up. And they used to do a podcast called PS I Love You. Now, I never really bothered with Kind of Funny because back in the day, I never really cared about IGN guys. I never cared about Colin Moriarty. I never cared about Greg Miller. It wasn't until like maybe 2017 that I started listening to PS I Love You, XOXO. And that's only because of Colin Moriarty, because I think Colin Moriarty is a very knowledgeable guy. I think he is extremely talented when it comes to actual like journalism and trying to get sources in there and uncover the bullshit in the game industry. You can think what you want to think about him politically. I don't really care about any of that. What I care about is the fact that he is seems like a really chill, knowledgeable dude when it comes to PlayStation stuff. And for guys who know me, my channel, I'm a big PlayStation guy. And I watched PS I Love You XOXO for maybe a couple months before they split up, before Moriarty left. And I liked it. I still didn't really like Greg Miller all that much. I definitely thought he was the weakest link in that show. Or actually no, what was the other guy that they brought on? I forget his fucking name. The third wheel that they brought on, that I find him annoying as well. But Colin Moriarty, I think he really brought something to that podcast, and his dynamic with Greg Miller was really nice to watch. It was pleasant to listen to. But then Colin Moriarty left, and Greg Miller stopped PS I Love You just because it wouldn't be the same without Colin Moriarty, which I think was a smart move. Not the most popular move, but the smartest one, definitely. Now it's been announced by Kind of Funny Games that they are bringing back PS I Love You XOXO. It's not going to be with Greg Miller and Colin Moriarty. It's going to be with this guy named Blessing Adio. I'm so sorry if whoever if you're watching this, Blessing. I'm so sorry. I'm about to butcher your last name. Blessing Adeoye, I guess. So it's gonna be Greg Miller and this Blessing dude. They're gonna come back for PS I Love You XOXO. And that honestly rubs me the wrong way. One, because that name, PS I Love You XOXO, is synonymous with Greg Miller and Colin Moriarty. And even like people that are normally kind of funny fans are going like, yeah, maybe don't call it that, dude, because we still like Colin Moriarty, and don't do that, please. And also, secondly, Greg Miller, I think misunderstands what made PS I Love You XOXO its thing. It was the dynamic between him and Colin Moriarty. It's not going to be the same with this Blessing Adeoye guy. And I'm pretty sure this Blessing Adeoye guy is not going to have the same knowledge and the same cynical eye that Colin Moriarty does. There's a reason that they had a show for a while there on kind of funny called Colin Was Right. Because Colin Moriarty, he called it like he saw it, and he was right like a good chunk of the time. He really was. And I just don't think this Blessing guy, I mean, he might be a cool dude, but I just don't think he's going to bring that same dynamic to PS I Love You XOXO. And this also comes across as pretty icky, especially given the history that Colin Moriarty has with Greg Miller. Now, I know we don't have the full context behind every single little thing that went down between the two of them, but pretty much the way I saw it, and the way like a lot of people see it, is that Colin Moriarty, he wanted to, still be friends with Greg Miller after this whole like breakup of the two of them. And I think there's even like a podcast where Colin Moriarty, I think he went on I think it was like the Rubin Report or something. It was some kind of like political podcast where he talked about how he tried getting back in contact with Greg Miller, and Greg Miller basically like told him, no. It was like a breakup. It was like, oh yeah, I'm we're done. That's basically what he told Colin, and Colin was just like, oh well, all right. And that was it. So the fact that Greg Miller turned his back on his friend over something like so like petty, just a stupid tweet that was just like a silly joke or whatever. That's why I find Greg Miller not only to be a shill, not only to be like a sellout, but to be just a guy of questionable morals. I'm not going to say he's a complete raging asshole, because like I said, I'm probably certain he's a nice guy in real life, but the fact that he's bringing this podcast back, and it's very suspicious, because I'm pretty sure he's bringing it back for business purposes, because the PlayStation 5 is going to start rolling out next year. Or sorry, now that it's 2020, it's going to start rolling out in the fall time. And I'm pretty sure, I have a very sneaking suspicion, pretty big hunch, that PlayStation have gotten in contact with Greg Miller and have kind of asked him like, hey, bring back PS I Love You XOXO so we can start promoting the PlayStation 5 through you guys. And Greg Miller, being the cocksucker that he is, went, okay. He had to take like the Nintendo dick out of his mouth, or the Xbox dick out of his mouth, to put the PlayStation 1 back in. So that's just the thing. That's just the way I see it. And I think that also stings too, considering that the video game industry basically like have blackballed Colin Moriarty for just the dumbest reasons. Look, you may not like Colin Moriarty as a person, but you gotta admit the guy is like super knowledgeable, and he's got a big audience with the Colin's Last Stand and the Sacred Symbols podcast, which was actually a pretty good podcast. Like I said, I haven't listened to it regularly in a long time, but I just find this whole thing just to be very icky. It's a very icky situation, and I don't know how a lot of other people think. I guess going by the public replies on the tweets, people are like kind of like, there's a mix of like small excitement with a lot of skepticism from like the loudest, most upvoted voices, but there's always going to be that core fandom. It's going to go, oh, PS I Love You XOXO, woo! But especially considering the industry just don't want to have anything to do with the PlayStation podcast that he's got, and I'm pretty sure they're gonna like Greg Miller is just gonna like spread his asshole and just let all the fucking studios come in there and just try to fucking hawk their shit on this podcast. And without that keen eye that Colin Moriarty had, that more like down to earth, like cynical eye, this whole thing's just going to come across as like a giant circle jerk. It's just going to be the biggest fucking fluff piece podcast. It's basically like going to be like every single other entertainment podcast out there. It's just going to be like the most circle jerk, like unthinking, uncritical bullshit out there. And that really sucks, considering PS I Love You XOXO was like for a time, was like the biggest, like one of the biggest video game podcasts out there. And a lot of that had to do with the dynamic between Colin Moriarty and Greg Miller. But now this PS I Love You XOXO is just going to be a shell of its former self. It's not going to be anything special. And it's only going to be there just so PlayStation can come in and hype up the PlayStation 5 and their games for the next like few years or so. I don't blame PlayStation for doing it. I really don't. Like, I mean, PlayStation, like, it's a name. It's a brand name, and I can't fault them for that, but I do have a little bit of, like, harsh feelings towards PlayStation for just basically abandoning Colin Moriarty, and now they're going to embrace the more sellout of the two. They're just going to embrace the one that's all like, I'm loud, and I'm quippy, and I'm not going to question anything you guys are doing, because you guys are... I'm paying for access, because he gets access. That's how this works with media influencers and all that shit. Anyway, that's a whole nother rant for another day about influencers and media outlets and whatever. But anyway, I just wanted to make this little video because I felt like venting about this, because this is, I've wanted to do a video about Kind of Funny for a while now, but I just haven't really found the right topic for it until today. I wanted to do one about their Kingdom Hearts fuck up thing that they did like at the beginning of this year, or I think it was like it was either like late last year or the beginning of this year. But yeah, PS I Love You XOXO, this is not going to be the PS I Love You XOXO that you guys think it's going to be. It's just going to be a hollow, dick-sucking shell of its former self, and that makes me very sad.